The person you love is begging you to open this. Something happened just minutes ago. My beloved child, don't move past this moment too quickly, because something shifted only minutes ago, and the person you love suddenly realized there is one truth they can no longer keep locked behind silence. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something they expected to understand today. But one ordinary moment changed the way they were looking at you. And now, if they could place one message directly in front of you, it would be simple. Please hear me before you decide what my silence meant. Stay with this, because what happened moments ago wasn't some dramatic scene everyone could see. It was quieter than that. Almost invisible. Yet inside them, something clicked into place. For a long time, they may have been trying to understand why thoughts of you kept returning at the most unexpected times. They could stay busy. They could focus on tomorrow. They could convince themselves that certain feelings belonged to yesterday. Then something reminded them of you. A phrase. A memory. A tiny detail connected to a conversation you once shared. And suddenly, the story they had been telling themselves no longer made sense. Here is where everything begins to change. They realized they had been measuring your connection by what was missing instead of noticing what had remained. Think about that. Distance can change routines. Silence can change expectations. Time can change perspective. But some connections leave an imprint that becomes clearer only when everything around them becomes quiet. And only minutes ago, that quiet gave them an answer. They understood that what they had been avoiding wasn't you. It was the truth of what you meant to them. Don't skip what comes next, because there is another layer they still haven't admitted. They remembered something you did that seemed insignificant when it happened. Maybe you listened when nobody else truly listened. Maybe you noticed something behind their smile. Maybe you offered understanding without demanding anything in return. Whatever that moment was, they finally saw its meaning differently. And the realization was immediate. You had understood a part of them they were still learning to understand themselves. That is why they would be begging you to open this message now. Not because you need to chase them. Not because your future depends on one person. But because there are moments when truth arrives later than expected, and when it arrives, it rearranges everything that came before it. What if this is one of those moments? Stay a little longer. Because while they were replaying the past, another thought appeared, one connected not to yesterday, but to what could happen next. For the first time, they stopped asking, what if this connection becomes complicated? And started asking something completely different. What if I lose the chance to say what I finally understand? That question changed their entire emotional direction. Suddenly, tomorrow looked different. The conversations they had postponed felt more important. The words they had swallowed felt heavier. And the possibility of continuing as though nothing mattered no longer felt convincing. But there is something they still haven't figured out. How do you tell someone that your understanding arrived late? How do you explain that the silence wasn't emptiness? How do you admit that one small moment, only minutes ago, made you reconsider everything? That is the mystery sitting between you and what comes next. Because the person you love may have finally discovered what they want to tell you. But they are still searching for the courage to put the most important part into words. And when that missing sentence finally becomes clear, you'll understand why this sudden realization happened now, and why what comes next may look completely different from what you expected. Something unexpected followed that realization, and this is where the story moves in a direction even they didn't see coming. Because after those memories returned, the person you love didn't simply sit there thinking about the past. They made a decision. A quiet one. The kind of decision that happens internally before anyone else can notice that something has changed. They stopped trying to explain away what they felt. For perhaps the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to imagine what would happen if they actually spoke honestly to you. And strangely, the first emotion wasn't uncertainty. It was relief. Stay a little longer, because that relief revealed something important. They had spent so much time wondering what you might think, how you might respond, whether too much time had passed, or whether you had already begun walking toward an entirely different chapter. But only minutes ago, another possibility entered their mind. What if you had been waiting for clarity too? That thought stopped them. Because suddenly they began remembering the unanswered moments between you, not as endings, but as unfinished sentences. A conversation that could have gone deeper. A question neither of you asked. A moment when one more honest sentence might have changed the direction of everything. And now they can see it. The connection wasn't necessarily missing something. The communication was. There is a difference. And before you go, hear this carefully. Their realization does not mean you should put your life on hold. Your path is still yours. Your confidence, your direction, and your future should never depend entirely on whether another person chooses to speak. But sometimes two people can misunderstand the same silence in completely different ways. You may have thought, if they cared, they would say something. Meanwhile, they may have been thinking, if I say something now, will they still want to hear it? That gap can become enormous. Until one moment closes it. And something happened only minutes ago that made them realize silence could no longer answer the questions they were carrying. They need truth. They need clarity. And most importantly, they want you to know something about the way they actually see you. Here is the surprising part. It isn't simply, I missed you. It goes deeper. They have begun to understand that you affected the direction of their thinking. Certain choices they are considering now, certain standards they have developed, even the way they imagine their future, it all carries traces of lessons connected to knowing you. They didn't recognize that immediately. Now they do. And that is exactly why this message feels urgent to them. If this story is speaking to something you've experienced, you can share what resonates in the comments, send it to someone who might appreciate the message, and subscribe if you want to continue this journey together. Now stay with me, because we haven't reached the turning point. There is one detail they remembered after everything else. One sentence connected to you. At the time, they barely understood its importance. Today, it returned with completely different meaning. And when it did, they suddenly understood why you behaved the way you did during one of the most confusing moments between you. You weren't trying to create distance. You may have been protecting your peace. You weren't asking them to prove themselves. You were waiting for consistency. And you weren't demanding perfection. You wanted honesty. That realization changed the question inside their mind once again. They are no longer wondering whether they should speak. Now they are wondering how soon they can finally make themselves understood. But wait until the next moment, because there is still one thing they haven't said, and it may explain why this realization arrived so suddenly in the first place. Something about their future became clear today. And somehow, you were already standing inside the picture. Then came the second realization, the one that made everything before it feel like preparation. The person you love began looking beyond the memory that had just resurfaced. Beyond the unanswered conversations. Beyond all the possibilities they had replayed in their mind. And for one unexpected moment, they pictured their future without assuming you would automatically be somewhere inside it. That changed everything. Because suddenly, they understood something people often recognize only when they stop taking tomorrow for granted. Meaningful connections cannot survive forever on unspoken intentions. You can care deeply and still communicate poorly. You can remember someone constantly and still remain silent. You can imagine 1,000 conversations and never actually begin one. But imagination cannot replace honesty. And only minutes ago, that truth became impossible for them to ignore. Don't skip this moment, because their thoughts moved somewhere surprising. Instead of asking what you might give them, they began wondering what they could finally bring into your life. Clarity instead of confusion. Consistency instead of guessing. Presence instead of promises that never become actions. Something inside their perspective matured. And perhaps that is the real event behind everything happening now. Not some impossible coincidence. Not a dramatic secret arriving from nowhere. A shift in awareness. The kind that quietly changes what someone chooses next. They realize that if they ever approach you again, they cannot arrive carrying the same patterns that created uncertainty before. They would need to meet you differently. More openly. More intentionally. More honestly. And here is the detail you weren't expecting. They are beginning to understand that your value was never determined by how desperately you tried to keep their attention. It was visible in the moments when you remained yourself. When you continued growing. When you refused to lose your direction simply because someone else was uncertain about theirs. That independence may have confused them once. Now they respect it. Pause here. Because the message they wish they could place directly into your hands is becoming clearer. It would sound something like this. I finally understand what you were trying to show me without forcing me to understand. And there is enormous meaning hidden inside that realization. Sometimes another person doesn't understand your intentions while they are standing inside the moment. They understand later, after experience gives them the perspective they were missing. That appears to be what happened here. Something ordinary occurred only minutes ago, but it connected several memories at once. Suddenly, your patience made sense. Your boundaries made sense. Even certain moments when you stepped back made sense. And once those pieces connected, another question entered their mind. What if the next chapter doesn't need to repeat the previous one? That question opened a door. Not a guarantee. Not a prediction you should build your entire future around. A possibility. Because your future remains yours to shape, whether this person speaks tomorrow, next month, or never says everything they are currently thinking. Remember that. You are not waiting at the edge of somebody else's decision. You are moving forward. And if someone truly wants to walk beside you, eventually their actions have to move forward too. But there is still one unfinished piece. The person you love has realized what they want to change. They have realized what you meant. They have even imagined the conversation they wish they could have with you. Yet one question remains unanswered. What exactly happened minutes ago that triggered all of this? That answer is closer than you think. Because it wasn't only a memory that returned. They discovered something about themselves while thinking about you, something they had overlooked for a very long time. And once they saw it, they could no longer pretend the connection had meant nothing. The next choice is theirs. But whatever happens next, one truth has already changed. They are finally seeing the past with different eyes. And that new perspective may be the beginning of an entirely different future, but the real turning point arrived after they thought the realization was already complete. Because the person you love noticed one detail that had been hiding in plain sight. Every time they imagined becoming the person they truly wanted to be. More focused, more certain, more intentional, the same kind of future kept appearing. And somehow, you were connected to it. Not because you were supposed to rescue them. Not because they needed you to complete their life. Something far more meaningful was happening. They associated you with growth. That was the discovery. And suddenly, the urgency behind everything began making sense. Stay till the end, because what happened minutes ago wasn't simply about remembering you. It was about understanding why remembering you felt different from remembering anyone else. Certain people remind us of where we have been. Others remind us of who we could become. And they finally realized you belonged to the second category. That realization forced them to examine something uncomfortable but important. Had they been protecting themselves from disappointment so carefully that they were also protecting themselves from possibility? For a moment, they had no answer. Then another memory surfaced. It was something small you once said or did. Maybe you encouraged an idea they had almost abandoned. Maybe you believed they were capable of more before they believed it themselves. Maybe you simply treated their dreams seriously when everyone else considered them temporary. Whatever the moment was, they suddenly understood its value. You saw potential. And instead of using that knowledge to control them, you gave them room to discover it independently. Now imagine what that realization does to someone. They begin replaying everything. Different conversations. Different choices. Different moments when they could have spoken honestly but chose the easier route of saying nothing. And one thought keeps returning. If I understand this now, what am I going to do differently? That question matters more than any promise. Because words can describe intention. Actions reveal direction. And somewhere inside them, they know that if they truly want another chapter with you, they cannot simply appear with beautiful sentences. Something has to be different. You'll understand everything at the end, but first notice what changed inside their thinking. Earlier, they were focused on whether you still cared. Now they are focused on whether they can show up with the clarity you deserve. Earlier, they wondered whether you would answer. Now they wonder whether their actions would finally match what they say. That is growth. And whatever happens between you, that growth matters. If these words have reminded you of someone or helped you see your own journey differently, share this with someone who might need the perspective, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you want to continue exploring these deeper turning points together. Now come back to the mystery. Why did this happen today? Why minutes ago? Why did all these disconnected pieces suddenly become one clear picture? Because something unexpectedly simple happened. They were making an ordinary decision about their future. Nothing dramatic. Just a choice involving where they wanted their life to go next. And while imagining the outcome, they instinctively thought about telling you. Before anyone else. That surprised them. They stopped. Because after all the silence, all the uncertainty, and all the effort to convince themselves they had moved beyond these questions, their first instinct was still. I wish I could tell them. And there it was. The answer they had been avoiding. You weren't simply attached to an old memory. In their mind, you were still connected to tomorrow. Wait till the final moment, because there is one final revelation left. They now know what they want to say. They know why they want to say it. And they understand what must be different if they ever get the opportunity. But there is one sentence they are still hesitating to speak. Not because they don't know whether it is true. Because admitting it would require them to finally stop hiding behind uncertainty. And when that sentence is revealed, the entire meaning of what happened minutes ago will become clear, and just when they thought they understood everything, one final piece fell into place. The sentence they had been avoiding was no longer complicated. It wasn't a dramatic promise about forever. It wasn't an attempt to rewrite everything that happened between you. It was quieter. More mature. And far more meaningful. I should have been clearer about what you meant to me. That realization changed the entire atmosphere inside them. Because suddenly, they could see the difference between feeling something and actually honoring it. You can appreciate someone privately. You can think about them constantly. You can imagine conversations at midnight and replay memories during ordinary afternoons. But if none of that becomes honest communication, the other person may never know what was happening beneath the surface. And now they understand that. Stay a little longer, because there is something powerful hidden inside this moment. Their realization does not automatically mean they will appear tomorrow with every answer. It doesn't mean you should stop moving forward and wait beside your phone. Your life is much bigger than somebody else's timing. But something inside their perspective has shifted. They no longer see you as someone permanently available in the background of their story. They see you as a person with your own direction. Your own opportunities. Your own future. And for the first time, they are asking themselves whether continued silence could mean watching you move into a chapter where they no longer have the place they once assumed would remain open. That thought created urgency. Not panic. Awareness. There is a difference. And perhaps that is why the person you love would be begging you to open this now. They finally understand that meaningful connections deserve more than assumptions. They require courage, clarity, consistency, and the willingness to say what matters while there is still an opportunity to say it. But here comes the unexpected part. While thinking about what they might tell you, they stopped imagining how you would react. Instead, they began asking themselves whether they were ready to accept any answer you might give. That question revealed their growth. Because genuine honesty isn't about controlling someone else's response. It is about speaking clearly while respecting their freedom to choose. And that may be exactly where this story is heading. They want you to understand what changed inside them. But they also know you have changed. You are not standing exactly where you were before. Life has taught you things. Time has sharpened your awareness. Perhaps your standards have become clearer. Perhaps you now understand that a meaningful connection should not require you to abandon your peace just to keep it alive. And strangely, that version of you may be the version they finally understand. Before you go, hear this line. Whatever they decide to do next, do not shrink your future to fit their hesitation. Keep building. Keep learning. Keep becoming. Because if two paths are truly capable of moving forward together, neither person should have to stop growing for the connection to survive. Then the smallest detail became the loudest message of the entire day. Right after that future decision, something connected to you crossed their attention unexpectedly. Maybe it was your name appearing somewhere ordinary. Maybe it was a familiar place, an old conversation, or a detail carrying a memory only the two of you would fully understand. Whatever it was, the important part wasn't the coincidence. It was their reaction. They didn't immediately look away. They stopped. And in those few seconds, everything they had been realizing suddenly became impossible to dismiss. Because there you were again, not physically standing beside them, but present inside a moment when they were already questioning what they truly wanted next. Now listen carefully, because this is where their thinking changed completely. They had spent so much time searching for certainty before taking action. They wanted the perfect moment. The perfect words. The perfect confidence. But life rarely gives anyone perfect conditions for meaningful conversations. Sometimes clarity arrives first, and courage has to catch up afterward. That is exactly where they seem to be now. One part of them wants to reach toward you immediately. Another part remembers every unfinished conversation and wonders whether they have waited too long. Then a completely different thought enters. Maybe the goal isn't to erase the past. Maybe it is simply to stop repeating it. That possibility feels different. Because suddenly, they are not imagining some flawless reunion where every misunderstanding disappears instantly. They are imagining something more believable. One honest conversation. One clear explanation. One moment without guessing. And perhaps that is all a new direction ever needs at the beginning. Stay with this moment, because there is a truth here for you too. You do not need to predict what another person will do in order to continue becoming who you want to be. You do not need to decode every silence. And you certainly do not need to place your happiness on hold while waiting for someone else's clarity. If they speak, you can listen. If they show consistency, you can observe it. If their actions align with their words, you can decide what that means for your future. The choice remains yours. And strangely, they are beginning to understand that too. That may be why the message inside them has changed. Earlier, it sounded like, "Please understand why I disappeared into silence." Now it sounds more like, "Please give me the opportunity to explain what I finally understand." Notice the difference. One asks you to excuse the past. The other takes responsibility for what comes next. And that distinction could determine everything. But something huge is waiting beneath this realization. Because when that unexpected reminder of you appeared minutes ago, they remembered one promise they had quietly made to themselves. A promise that had nothing to do with chasing anyone. It was about becoming more honest whenever something truly mattered. And suddenly, they were faced with the perfect test of that promise. You. Would they remain silent again? Would they create another imaginary conversation and never let it become real? Or would they finally become the version of themselves they kept claiming they wanted to be? For several moments, they simply stared at what had reminded them of you. Then something inside them settled. Not excitement. Not uncertainty. Decision. They knew they could no longer control how you might respond. They could only control whether they approached the situation with sincerity. And once they accepted that, the fear of finding perfect words began disappearing. Because maybe the message doesn't need to be perfect. Maybe it only needs to be true. But wait, there is still one final twist in what happened minutes ago. Just as they became ready to stop hiding behind silence, they realized something about you that they had completely misunderstood from the beginning. And that realization may change not only what they want to tell you, but the very first words they choose when they finally do. What they misunderstood about you was finally becoming impossible to ignore. For so long, the person you love may have believed your quietness meant you had stopped caring. They may have interpreted your independence as distance, your boundaries as indifference, and your decision to keep moving forward as proof that whatever existed between you had faded. But minutes ago, they considered another explanation. What if you weren't becoming colder? What if you were simply becoming clearer? That question completely rearranged the story in their mind. They began remembering the moments when you could have demanded answers but chose dignity instead. The times you could have chased reassurance but stepped back. The moments when uncertainty could have consumed your attention, yet you continued building your own path. Suddenly, they understood something they had missed. You were never asking them to read your mind. You were waiting to see whether their actions could speak for them. And that realization matters, because it changes the first words they want to say. They no longer want to begin by explaining themselves for 20 minutes. They don't want to overwhelm you with everything they have been thinking. They want to begin with something much simpler. I see it differently now. Stay till the final moment, because those words carry more weight than they appear to. Seeing something differently means recognizing where assumptions replaced communication. It means admitting that silence created stories neither person could verify. And most importantly, it means understanding that whatever happens next cannot be built entirely on what happened before. There would have to be a new standard. Clear words. Patient actions. Room for both people to choose freely. That is the future they are beginning to imagine. Not a perfect future. A more honest one. And here is where something surprising happened inside them. They stopped rehearsing the outcome. Until now, every imaginary conversation with you had ended exactly the way they wanted. You understood everything. Every question disappeared. The future became obvious. But reality doesn't work like a rehearsed scene. You may have questions. You may need time. You may see things differently. And they finally realize that respecting your perspective is part of caring about you. That understanding has made them calmer. Because now their goal isn't to convince you of anything. Their goal is to finally tell the truth clearly enough that you can decide what it means for yourself. Don't skip this next piece. The event from minutes ago triggered another realization they weren't expecting. They noticed how much energy they had spent wondering whether you still thought about them. Then suddenly they asked a better question. If I care this much, why am I waiting for them to prove something first? Silence followed. Because there was no comfortable answer. They understood that someone eventually has to interrupt the cycle of guessing. Someone has to choose clarity. And they are beginning to believe that person should be them. But remember, this story isn't asking you to wait. Your future does not sit inside an unopened message. Keep moving toward everything that strengthens your life, expands your possibilities, and makes tomorrow feel meaningful. If someone truly wants to reconnect with your path, let their consistency reveal that. Because the most beautiful future isn't created by chasing certainty. It is created when truth and action finally begin moving in the same direction. And now we arrive at the detail that changed their next move. After everything they realized, they looked again at that unexpected reminder of you. This time, instead of returning to another memory, they thought of one specific thing they had never asked you. One question. A question so simple that they couldn't believe it had remained unspoken for this long. And suddenly, they knew that if they ever got the opportunity to speak with you again, this question would matter more than every carefully prepared explanation. Because your answer could reveal whether the door between yesterday and tomorrow is actually closed. Or whether both of you have simply been standing on opposite sides, waiting for someone to speak first. Now the question they never asked is louder than every answer they rehearsed. And strangely, it has nothing to do with whether you still miss them. Nothing about proving feelings. Nothing about forcing the past to become the future. The question is far more important. Where are you now in your life? That is what they finally want to understand. Because minutes ago, while everything inside them was shifting, they recognized that they had been remembering an older version of you. The you from previous conversations. The you from unfinished moments. The you they thought they understood. But time has continued moving. You have continued moving. And if they genuinely care about reconnecting with your world, they cannot approach you as though nothing has changed. That realization stopped them again. What if your dreams are different now? What if your priorities have changed? What if the things you once accepted no longer fit the person you are becoming? Suddenly, their imagined conversation with you transformed. They stopped thinking about everything they needed to say. And started thinking about everything they needed to hear. That may be the biggest change yet. Because sometimes the strongest proof of growth isn't finally finding the perfect speech. It is becoming willing to listen. Hold on to that thought. The person you love is beginning to understand that knowing your history does not automatically mean knowing your present. They may remember your kindness, your patience, the way you once responded to them. But none of those memories gives them ownership over who you are today. So if they step toward you, they know they must meet you where you are now, not where they left the story unfinished. And that brings us back to what happened only minutes ago. That unexpected reminder of you didn't merely create nostalgia. It created perspective. They saw how quickly life keeps moving while people postpone important conversations. Days become weeks. Plans change. People grow. New doors appear. And eventually, a conversation someone assumed could happen someday may require completely different words. That is why their urgency feels different now. They are not thinking, how do I get everything back? They are thinking, how do I discover what is still possible without disrespecting everything that has changed? Stay with this, because the answer they reached was surprisingly simple. They cannot begin with expectations. They have to begin with honesty. Then listen. Then allow reality, not imagination, to reveal what comes next. For the first time, they are willing to let the conversation have an unknown ending. And that is important. Because your answer belongs to you. Your direction belongs to you. Your future belongs to you. Someone else's realization can be meaningful without becoming an obligation for you. But there is one more extraordinary detail. When they imagined asking where you are now in your life, another question immediately followed. This one was directed at themselves. Where am I? Not physically. Internally. Are they actually ready to communicate differently? Are they prepared to demonstrate consistency instead of merely describing it? Are they ready to hear something they didn't expect? Those questions created a silence unlike all the others. Because now there was nowhere left to hide. And then something clicked. Maybe what happened minutes ago was never supposed to give them every answer. Maybe it was supposed to make them finally ask the right questions. That thought gave them a completely different vision of what could come next. Not racing towards some predetermined ending. Not trying to recreate yesterday. Two people meeting again with clearer eyes and discovering whether their paths still make sense beside each other. And just when they accepted that possibility, another realization surfaced. There is something they have wanted to tell you that isn't about the past at all. It is about a decision they are preparing to make next. A decision that could change the direction of their own life whether you are involved or not. But before they make it, there is one truth about you they desperately want you to understand. And once that truth is spoken, you may finally understand why everything inside them changed only minutes ago.